Honey locust. Okay, we got a mature one over there too we can look at, so everybody can get an idea what a mature honey locust looks like. This is an immature one. It's not really happy. It's sending out all these water sprouts down here. That's a sign of stress. But this is the honey locust, and I have not had to spray a single honey locust in the city in 27 years. Actually, that's not true. I sprayed one, but she brought that tree back from BC with the bug on it. Okay, so we don't have any natural devastating type pests going after the honey locust. And this is an immature one. At full maturity, we'll just walk over there. I didn't say full maturity, but it is probably 25, 26 years old. And that's what they look like. Kind of lacy, similar to what you would find with a birch, which is right beside us, obviously. But very, very delicate, very lightweight trees. Now, as they mature, they get these long seed pods on them. So they can be a little messy if that's a problem for you. If it's in a mulch bed, you don't have to worry about it. They fall down, self-propagate, so you might end up with 4 or 5 or 10 or 15 new ones. Haven't seen any naturalization of these in our area, but they are certainly hardy, and we do not have to spray them, which I thoroughly enjoy. They don't get too big for our urban settings, so you're not, it's not like a cottonwood that's 65, 70 feet tall. This is probably about as tall as they get, and quite enjoyable. This is a mid-size honey locust, and he's just starting to break bud too, so you can see some new growth coming out. The other one was a full size. This is a mid-size one, and that's typically how they look. Very vosel shaped, or not very vosel, but more vosel shaped than a lot of other trees. They're not a round-headed tree, and they do get, like I say, those seed pods. In the fall, if we were filming this, you would see these long, looks like a pea pod or a bean pod. I got one on the west side, 12, 13 inches long, and over the winter months they fall off. There's not a lot. It's like 1 or 2 per branch sort of type thing. So it's not really messy, but it does leave some debris. All trees leave some debris. If you didn't have the debris, you wouldn't have any organic breakdown in the soil profile to create those nitrates that the little critters that feed on those decomposing parts. Their waste product is what creates the nitrogen for the tree. Usually enough, but if we clean it up, we're asking for trouble. Okay, so this is a green ash. It's a female green ash. And you can tell by these little samaras here, these little seed pods, that's what indicates a female. Some trees are dioecious, some are monoecious. So monoecious would have both sexes on the same tree. Monoecious will be one sex on the tree. Dioecious will have both sexes on the tree. So these are monoecious. There's female ashes and male ashes. And the females are very easy to tell even from a distance, because their stems seem to come out of the ground and just stay the same. There's not a real good taper to them. Whereas the maples, the males tend to have a much better flare and better structure as they go up. The females also get hit by insects a lot more. So right there you got a lot of western ash bark beetle damage there. It's almost like they're attracted to the females because of the extra juice to make the seeds and flowers. And yeah, their structure is definitely different. So taper is very important on your trees to survive our winds. This is the bur oak, and as you can see on these little pods, they have holes in the end of them. That's a parasitic wasp that goes after the insect that attacks the bur oak, and the tree actually produces this pod to try and encompass the insect, and then along comes a parasitic wasp, and you can see fresh ones right there. Parasitic wasp pokes in there, feeds on the insect, and kills the insect basically. And they grow fairly slow. Really hard to determine the internodal growth on these particular trees, especially when they've obviously had a terrible aphid outbreak here. It's black. And that's sooty mold that's created from the waste product of aphids and adelgids, and to a lesser degree some of your Scales will do the same thing too. Scales, particularly on the elms, will cause a blackening of your trunk and a blackening of your surfaces. And those ones need to be treated systemically, either by injection or soil drench to control those insects. This particular one, I don't recommend doing anything other than a dormant oil in the spring, and it acts as a suffocant and it controls the population. These do not cause much harm to the tree. I've seen trees that are just, one little ball after another all the way down, and they're still growing. They're still doing fine. So they typically outgrow that particular pest problem, and we don't have to do a lot with these. They prefer more acidic than base. I think their ideal rate is about 5.4 for pH. And you can compare that with the other, you kind of have to go with a generalization, because if you got 10 different species of trees in your yard, you can't create a zone of pH that's ideal for each one. You have to kind of go with an average. So if you can get your pH down to about 6.5 and maintain that, you're going to have more success with it. Now, the problem with that is that you're using sulfur, using aluminum sulfates, you're dropping the pH down, it stays that way for a while, you irrigate, it slowly brings it back up again. So it's just a constant battle. The most excellent way you can to buffer the pH is to add organics. And I brought the drill, it's in the truck, so I can't show you, but basically all it is an earth auger, 2-inch earth auger, and I go around my trees, outside at the drip line. So here's the drip line of the tree. So there's roots out here, the absorptive roots are all out here, and I'll go along and I'll do a crisscross pattern with my drill, and I'll backfill it with leaf clippings, wood chips, anything organic. I'm very careful with manure from farms and stuff like that, because it can be very hot, and it's just like taking a handful of nitrogen dumping on the lawn, it burns that part of the lawn. Same thing when you're putting straight cow manure or horse manure into a hole over top of roots. You can burn those roots and actually cause damage. And you'll follow that back up on your deciduous trees. You follow it back up almost in a straight line, and one of the branches that intersects with that you've killed now no longer has that food system coming up, and you'll see a branch that's been affected by that. On your conifers, it'll spiral up. So you won't really know exactly where the problem is. You'll know because you drilled the hole, but you won't know if somebody else drilled the hole. But that's how I do that. It's an 18-inch spiral earth auger bit, and I've got it on a big DeWalt drill, and I just drill down. I don't go down far, 4 to 6 inches is plenty, and just backfill it with organics. You can also do mycorrhizae treatments like that. A lot of people do the mic treatment right onto the root ball when they plant a tree, but if it's already planted, the only way to get the mycorrhizae in there is to drill those holes and backfill those holes. And you can add your nutrients then too if you want, but don't add copper-based fertilizers. Sorry. He's been following us. Don't add copper-based fertilizers with anything organic, because it will typically inhibit its ability to function. It's got something more to do scientifically than I can really explain. I've read it in the books, and so we avoid copper-based products. I try to stick with the the NPK and zinc, particularly for the birches, and I try to get more of the iron in there for the coloration. Got to be careful with iron too. I've seen people have been doing their lawns with iron, chelated iron rather than nitrogen, and it does green it up. The problem is it does not help the root system. So got to be careful with your fertilization. Come on. R2. And there you go. If you got a 9-iron or a wedge, chipping wedge, these are fantastic for practicing your yard. It's the seed pods, and if you peel the husk off, you will find a nut in there. Now, I don't suggest eating these. A, they have to be cooked, like baked in an oven at high temperatures. B, they can contain toxins. They're not growing in the normal soils, they're not growing in the native soils, so they may be pulling up more selenium or more other types of things, and they might have microorganisms in there feeding on them that our stomachs aren't prepared for. So I don't suggest you eat anything that falls off of a tree. The buckeyes, for example, Buckeyes and the horse chestnuts contain a product called aesculin. It's extremely toxic, and the same thing with a lot of your nut trees. And the optimum time for pruning these, any of your nut trees, so your oaks, your hickories, your Ohio Buckeyes, birches, maples, those are all July, August trees, because all season long they're moving juices down in July and August. That's the time you want to cut them. Then you don't release the pheromones that attract those pests that are so destructive to them. Do we want to get the lawnmower in there? Oh, that's a vac. Sorry, I thought it was a lawnmower. So don't eat these. I actually just I leave them be, mow them, break them down. They're going to put more nutrients back into the soil for the tree to continue to grow. But these are our pin oaks, and you can see the structure is very open, very much more upright compared to a bur oak that is more horizontal. So these guys are typically growing up, whereas the Ohio Buckeyes, or the first day with my new lips, the bur oaks are the bur and the white are out. So there's red oaks and white oaks. These are the two mother trees or mother species of them. And the rounded lobes and the pin oaks have very sharp, I'm looking for a leaf. So there you go. So your pin oak and your bur oak. Bur oak on the right, or I'm facing the camera. Anyway, the bur oak has the rounded lobes. That's in the red or white oak family. The sharp pointed leaves on the pin oak are from the red oak family.
Question yourself? I thought you were sitting there singing for a second.
The pests are the same for both of them. Other than the little galls you see, the little round galls that you see on the white oaks, we don't typically get them on the red oaks. But the borers, the aphids, the adelgids, all those are pretty universal with these particular species. And we've got two here that are quite attractive. So this guy over here is a real rare specimen in town. I've got 3 left of these, and at one point in time these were our #1 species to have in the city because they're a small-headed tree. They're more pyramidal, as you can kind of see, so they don't take up a lot of space. It's the black ash, and they did fantastic for about 10 years here, 10-12 years, and then they got something called cottony psyllid. And it just looks like like you took a Q-tip and you just kind of rub it in the crotch there. That's what they look like. It's a waxy product that they create to surround themselves with, so that when you spray a chemical on them, they don't get it. It doesn't get to the bug. It just sits on that wax. And they have just devastated the city's population of black ashes down to, I would say, less than 100. I've got 4 or 5 on the west side, and 2 or 3 in the rest of the city that are under my care right now. And it's not good. But this one might just be, and like with all trees, like with elms, some of them don't get the elm scale. With the black ashes, some of them don't get the cottony psyllid. Ironically enough, they still get the western ash bark beetle. They're called black ash because the black buds. On the green ash, it's more green. It's not really green, but it's more green. And the black ash, it's more black, but not really black. And for identification purposes, this is a really good tree to have, because you can see these spots here. That's where the juices come out to the bud, okay? And it's called a bundle scar. And it's got a whole bunch of little holes. I don't know if you can see it there. Maybe I can give you the magnifying glass and you can actually, does that help? Probably not, eh? Steady enough. I'd peel a live one off, but this is...
Push it this way just a little bit. There she is.
And most of them look like a happy face, because trees are always happy. That's why I'm always happy. Okay, so that's your black ash. You're probably going to see the odd one around town that's naturally resistant to that particular pest. Unfortunately, what happened is a lot of the companies came in and just did a clear cut because they didn't have either the knowledge or the experience or the patience to wait and see if we were going to get through that particular pest situation. And every time we wait, the trees respond by changing their own chemistry to actually do their own battle. They change the pheromones they're releasing, they change the thickness of their cell walls, they change the thickness of the bark. They do all kinds of chemical things to help them battle off certain pest infestations. But if we just come in and cut them down because it's half dead, or it looks half dead, we've eliminated the chance for that tree to, take care of itself. So it becomes dependent upon us. Sorry, chainsaw. Shiny. So that's the black ashes. You won't see a lot of them around. I don't think that the garden centers even sell them anymore. And this is a birch. One of our city's favorite trees is birches, and you can see the surface rooting here. It's happening. That's typically because of lack of water. So the water's not deep enough, so they surface root to get the water that they're competing with the grass with. And then you can see the damage down here. That's what we call lawnmower blight. There's a big damage here. You can see it's actually dented in, so that's where the lawnmower typically crashes into the base of the tree, or the weed whipper is constantly going around and weed whipping the tree. So they'll have a weaker structure there. Some of them will fail in a windstorm or a late season snowstorm if the foliage is out. But typically it's not the most terrible thing that could happen. But we can't avoid it by putting those little black rings that we saw on the other trees, by putting those on those and leaving them on for as long as possible. The other thing I suggest is take some vinegar, not salt, vinegar, on a nice sponge, and just dabbing it all the way around the basal area so you don't get any new growth there. If you've got grass growing up, either let it be or kill the grass off. Don't use Roundup, don't get carried away with any chemical applications, but you can use vinegar on there. That'll knock the grass back, and eventually the shade from the tree will keep the grass from growing anyway. We have an issue with the bronze birch borer in the city, and this guy doesn't seem to have any signs of it. Has not been injected for it, and so this is not a good sample for a pest control tree, unfortunately. But these guys again there's about 3 or 4 different species. We got river birch, canoe birch, white, and cutleaf weeping. But they're a very beautiful tree, and unfortunately they're being attacked by the bronze birch borer. The other thing that's going after them, Nectria galligina, is a fungal blight, and we can spray again with the copper fungicide. I use that for almost everything. It seems to work really good in controlling that. But the signs are similar to bronze birch borer. So if you got a drooping branch on your tree near the top or on the outside edge, that's either bronze birch borer or Nectria galligina. 2 different things you have to deal with. So you pull out your binoculars and you look up at the branch that is drooping, and you can see on that branch a D-shaped exit hole. Okay, so they bore in, they feed, they come out in later in the season, and they start to feed on foliage and breed. If you've got exit holes, that means they've been in there for at least a year, probably 2, and at that point in time, that's when you really want to address it through pruning, heavy fertilization with high nitrogen, zinc, and I use a lot of iron with that process too. It's kind of funny. Iron hardens the tree off. It's an essential nutrient for the lignin in the tree. It helps the tree to make the cell walls a little thicker. So we use a lot of that on there. And then of course the injection of azodactrin. There's other products that you can inject also, but the azodactrin seems to be the most effective. It stays in the tree for 2 years. It doesn't, when the foliage falls off, it doesn't stay, you know, in the leaf. It's pushed out from with the chlorophyll. When the cytokinin colorations are pushing the chlorophyll back into the tree in the fall, it naturally attaches those molecules of the azodactrin and brings it back into the tree. So it's a 2-year treatment. And in all honesty, I've treated probably 800 to 1,000 birch trees in town. 3 have had to be retreated, and that's just because they were so far gone. There was so much in there, or they didn't prune them, or they didn't fertilize them. They just went the cheap route and got the injection, which does kill the bug. But if you inject it into the tree and it comes up the tree, and let's say you've got a bronze birch borer right in here, and it's fed around the branch, the chemical can't get past that point. So that's where the pruning comes in very important. What a beautiful dog.
Yeah.
Thanks. Dogs, trees, come on. Dogs pee on trees, right? It's a thing. So it's very important to do the 3-step process if you want to keep your birch tree. The pruning is the hard pruning, and then the injection, and then the fertilization. And it's one and done. You don't, if you have to come back the next year and do it again, you're probably not going to have a successful tree that's going to survive. So annual injections, as per the labels on most of these chemicals, it says you have to do it every 2 years, or every year, or every 3 years, or whatever the label says. And that's I mean, eventually when you keep drilling holes in there, we become the pest. So we try to avoid that at all costs. 1 treatment and that should do it. And if it doesn't, then just make it smaller every year. And here's our favorite tree. Used to be my favorite tree. Russian olive. Hardy, no pests, don't have to water them, don't have to prune them. They just grow fantastically. Unfortunately, because they just grow fantastically, they're becoming invasive in our region. So, against my heart, we shouldn't be planting any more of these. It gets into the water system, the irrigation system, and it starts to grow along all of our pipes and ditches. It can become a real problem. Just spoke out in the head. He got a girl. So the other thing with these trees is, I guess the downside to them, is they're not a long-lived tree, especially in an irrigated situation. They do really well in dry land with no irrigation and no supplemental water, and probably a 40 to 50 year tree, which is better than some of your Brooks poplar species, which are like 30-year trees, or your tower poplars, which are like 20-year trees. So if you fall in love with your trees when you're in your 50s and 60s, and then you retire when you're 65, you're probably going to be replacing your trees. So pick carefully. Oaks are fantastic. Buckeyes, lindens are good trees. The honey locusts are great trees for long term. Plant one and you're done. And that's the whole idea, is to plant the right tree in the right spot, and then you don't have to do a whole bunch of things to it. Okay, so this is your Ohio buckeye. You should get a shot of this fantastic buds. Big pink. They're almost the size of my thumb.
Put your thumb back in there? Put your thumb back in there?
Okay.
Oh yeah. Nice.
Okay, so these guys produce nuts too. Apparently the deer like them more than, oh, there we go. Now when they produce their husk, it's, oh, there we go. It's full of these spikes. So what the spikes are designed to do is to hook onto deers and rabbits and cattle and horses and whatever animals, and it hooks onto them. That's why their brethren are called the horse chestnut, because the horses spread the seeds around That's the inside, and again, it's toxic. It's got aesculin in it. It's not good poisonous to touch, but if you do eat that, you are going to get sick. So I don't recommend eating any of the nut trees that we have in our region here. They're just not not edible. It's poison, so don't. But these are very hardy here too. Slow growing. I don't know exactly how old this one is, but I would say again, 25 to 30 years old. One of the first trees, exotic trees, I guess you could say, that the city experimented with, and then that ended for about 10 years, and then they came out and started planting them in mass after a while again. So maybe the cost went down, or they got a northern species genetic cross or something along that lines. But that's the beauty of these guys. A big palmate leaf like so, sticks out, handles the wind well, handles the insect pest populations really well. Now there was a period of time for about 10 years that they got a bacterial blight that caused some issues, and I had one in my backyard and I treated it like 4 or 5 different times with different fungicides and different bactericides, and what got it through was just time, just being patient with the tree and letting it do its thing. Now maybe the fungicides helped to keep it alive during that time. I don't know, because I'd already sprayed, so I couldn't really say. But the tree's still there and it's doing very well now without the fungicides and without any fertilization or anything like that. So very good trees. Weak wooded, so don't be hanging things off of them, and definitely don't be poking holes in them, because you could end up with something, a wood-boring insect that could come along and get into these guys here. I'm trying to try the Chinese. I don't want to blame the Chinese for this one, but it comes from China. The Asian longhorn beetle. This is one of their favorites in eastern Canada. So far we don't have that problem out here, but that's something you want to be careful of. So when you're pruning, again, any of the nut trees, birches, maples, July, August. And what we typically do is we come into the yard, we'll make a pruning cut on a tree to a node, and then we watch it. If it starts to drip, it's still actively translocating the starches and the carbohydrates and the sugars for the tree to survive. So we'll leave it. If it doesn't drip, we carry on and go at it. It'll compartmentalize and it'll be fine. If we prune it out of season, you are releasing pheromones into the environment, much as same as the elm trees, and you're going to attract pests that you don't want, and pests that are expensive to get rid of. So if you got nothing but money, have at her. But my suggestion is take the tree's health into consideration. Ohio Buckeye. Next up, another habitat situation. When you've got a utility line, obviously the utility companies come in and they take what they call clearances. They're trying to get clearances from the power lines, so there's no arcing to the tree. If the tree fails, it's not going to fall onto the power lines and take out the power. People's breathing apparatuses and their freezers and their computers and everything are pretty dependent upon the electric. So they do prune them. What happens, it can die back from that point because they're not doing proper pruning cuts, they're doing internodal cuts to get those clearances. They're trying to take as little as possible off the tree and get the maximum effect. So it's typically bigger cuts, and from there it'll start to rot, and you can kind of see what's happened right there on that, the bird holes underneath, and on top of it is the rotted wood. So that whole tree might be hollow inside, and that in itself is not a big issue, because the strength of your tree is the shell wall around the outside, and as long as that's not overly compromised, you're not going to have many issues with it. Now, these ones here have been breaking off and being cut off quite frequently because of the proximity to the three-phase power line back there, which is a bit of a concern, because they're kind of rotten. That's why you got so many birds moving in there. But the advantage is if you got the birds moving into your trees and your tree is basically structurally sound with the shell wall, it's okay. What you're actually doing is you're enhancing the ability of the birds to feed on the bugs that may or may not be causing you grief. So I typically promote trees like that to keep them in your yard and keep them functioning. So you got all kinds of entry holes here, and then down here you can see these wood boring insect holes. Now, if you've got these kind of wood boring insect holes on live tissue, you probably have a problem in your tree. If you have it on the dead wood, it's not a problem. It's wood wasps and beetles that typically just feed on the lignin and the cellulose of the wood. And sometimes they just bore in just to lay eggs, and then they leave. But if it's on dead wood, it's not a problem. You don't have to spray for it or anything like that. It's only when you see those types of holes and those types of patterns on live tissue. And oh, here. See, you even got a bigger bug. So that's a bird has gone in there and tried to build a home for himself, sort of type thing. This is a good example of what we would call bark tracing. So a car comes around the corner, crashes into your tree in your front yard, and oh my gosh, it's peeled off all the bark, and you just leave it. You're going to have loose stuff that insects are going to get underneath and probably get into your tree and cause more issues. So what you want to do is you want to take a nice sharp knife and just like this, cut to live tissue, razor knife, cut to live tissue so that the water can run off at the bottom and there's no loose bark for them to lay eggs on. Of course, there's none there. Because it's April. So, but that's bark tracing. You're creating a teardrop, I think they call it, shape so that the water can run off. It doesn't build up in there. Because if you just cut it down the sides and you don't cut the bottom so that it can drain out, the water can build up in there. And with the wood rotting, it's going to build up in there and it's going to freeze. And that will cause an expansion and cracking, more damage to your tree. So this guy's got a ton of them. And it's a good thing to have the birds in there. That's why you have the dead wood and you have the, sorry, stand beside you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I just wanted one more thing here. You can kind of see the staining that's run down there. You follow it up. That's sap flow, okay? Not necessarily a bad thing, but it will cause staining on your trunks, and you'll see it on elms, you'll see it on maples, Manitoba maples in particular, Siberian elms, American elms, and cottonwoods. You'll see quite a bit of that kind of stuff. And again, not anything terribly to be worried about, but you know you have a habitat tree when you see those kinds of activities, and it's not time to cut it down. If nothing else, leave a 12, 15 foot spar so that it's high enough that the kitty cats can't feed on the birds, and take off some of the side laterals, maybe leave a couple perches. Down at the south end of the city, I can't remember the name of the park, but we did a bunch of cabling and bracing on old cottonwoods that were already dead, just to keep them from falling, not failing. They can still fail, but they can't fall to the ground. Because the folks all around that lake wanted to keep those trees there that were from an old farmstead. They wanted to keep those trees there so that the flicker just went to hit you in the back of the head.
Yeah.
He's up there now. He just did a complete U-turn. I thought, oh, he's gonna hit him. He's gonna no. Anyway, sorry.
It doesn't like me, I guess.
Oh, we're too close to his nest. I think that's probably it. But anyway, we cabled them all up. And they're still cabled. I kind of said that's a 10-year thing, but they had hawks and eagles and those types of birds, the raptors, that were using that area when it was a farmstead as they're out. They could see all throughout the area. They had a good vision, line of sight for their prey, and they really wanted to keep it. So they spent a ton of money on getting that project done, and it's still there. Those cables are up there, and they're big, thick cables like so. From one branch to another, holding those trees up. So hopefully they don't have any issues with those. But that's how far you can go with habitat trees. Some of them, when we were down in the States, they would literally wrap ropes around so that they wouldn't split and fall apart, tied off at the top. But usually you take off the side laterals that are going to fail. If they're live, that's okay, but if they're dead, take those off and shorten them up so you still have a perch and a place for nesting, and leave some of the little dead wood so that the birds have something to build their nests with. I think that's what that might be from too. Either that or that's some neighbor that's not being neighborly.
Well, thanks, Grant. That was a Amazing
My pleasure.
video. That was
Always interesting to watch my local director get his jabs in.
all good.
I hope some of this information was helpful for you, and if you ever have any questions, trees are good. They're a very valuable site, but do remember that their information is not from our area, it's from other areas, so it might not be as pertinent as you expect. But if you can call any of your local arborists in southern Alberta and talk to them about their trees, you're going to get better answers than anything else. Hopefully some of this stuff helped you out, and thank you very much for watching.
Thanks, everybody.
Ta-da!
Oh, Jake and Shake.